Or what questions do you have coming out of Tuesday's lecture? Carly.
I thought the whole research thing was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something really I would have thought about doing, just going through the policy stuff. So I thought that was a really interesting research event.
Okay.
Series of research events, I guess.
Okay, cool. And what was somebody else tell me what was the research that was presented on Tuesday? It was a number of research projects? Karen, you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So who remembers? What were the, yeah?
Basically, I've recorded 8 years, or was it 10 years? 8 years. Her and a team of student interns analyzed police calls that came from locations around Madison that hosted live music.
Yeah.
So that could include things like karaoke.
Yeah.
Looked at all of those, related them and classified those performances that night at those venues by genre very specifically, and then I'm going to use the word proportion, but that's not the right word, but did it proportionally then, because there's far more rock shows than hip-hop shows in Madison, and then crunched that to see which genres and which events bred the most violence.
Okay.
And hip-hop was at the bottom.
Hip-hop was the least violent. All right. How many people were shocked? Let's not say shocked and appalled, but, shocked. How many people, had anybody heard about that study before? Put your hand up if you had heard about that study anywhere. Well, put your hands all the way up. I want to see the number, approximately. 1, 2, 3. 3 of you. The rest of you guys, the rest of you guys hadn't heard of or heard about that at all. Is that true? Okay, let me see your hands again. It was Carly and Ashton. And what's your name? Maddie. Maddie, where did you hear about it? Okay, so you heard about it somewhere. Was it recently? Could it have been in this class? Okay. Because the study is from 2017.
Correct, yeah. And it did get decent press, so.
Yeah, so could have heard about it, yeah. Ashton, where did you hear about it? Okay, that's interesting. I like this. That's the second part is the part that gives me some information. Because in the first, was it the first lecture? I think it was a first lecture in this class. Do you guys remember I showed the Stop the Violence video? KRS One, all the rappers from, a few people enrolled late. But most of the people in the room saw a slide where I showed your study from 2017. And, it's true, I didn't spend a lot of time on the slide, and I just used it to illustrate that Stop the Violence was 1987, and they're making that argument about, look, hip-hop's being blamed for, hip-hop is being blamed for violence, and so all the rappers got together and did something about it. And, the first person to raise their hand was Carly, who now is talking while I'm talking. But the reason why Carly remembered is because that's when we first met. And we had a conversation, and Carly told everybody what she was thinking, which she was like, oh, this is really interesting that the rappers are doing this, using hip-hop as a way to, using rap as a way to defend hip-hop culture.
Right, very interesting.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, but maybe it wasn't effective, because check this out. 30 years later, you got to do an academic study.
And what thing did I tell you about last time? What do we do, UCAN, in a similar fashion, rappers using rap and hip-hop to show the general public that it's not violent? Right. Summer concert series performances on State Street, where mostly not necessarily underground hip hop fans are going to be walking by. Yep, exactly.
So I'm going to turn it over to you. Maybe I can be your TA. So I'll just run around with the microphone. If people have questions, I was going to hand you the mic when your answer's done. But here's what I wanted to just say on this little interaction we just had, is that nobody remembered that I had shown that slide.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Except, and then Ashton, the reason that, except for 3 people, and I went backwards because I didn't know your name yet because we hadn't talked yet. But Ashton said she saw the slide and then she Googled it. Mm-hmm. So because she took action on the slide,
correct,
she remembers it. And that's why I propose, Carly, you can object if you want, but I think the reason why you remember is also because you took action on the slide. You had a conversation, a comment about it, and by engaging, remember I've been saying to you guys, like that reinforces it by using the material, by following up on it, asking your own questions. That's how it actually sticks in your head. Otherwise, you hear the lecture, you think you understand it, you think you're getting information, but that information is gone next week and not available to you when it's time for the midterm, or where it matters, when you're out in the world having these important conversations. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And Professor D, something you said is actually a perfect segue in what I'm going to talk about next. So the point of Stop the Violence happening 30 years ago and still being an issue today falls back into some things that I talked about on Tuesday, which is about this very powerful narrative that can't even be busted with 8 years of data, right? So what we're going to talk about today, and this is leading into what UCAN does from a programmatic standpoint. So I told you more about some of our professional development and then about our activism and advocacy work on Tuesday. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about the academic wrap-up program. I showed you a video of the kids rapping about climate change on Tuesday. But to do that, I want to make sure you understand why it's so important that we use hip-hop in the schools. And to that, we have to talk about culturally responsive pedagogy. So culturally responsive teaching is a concept that's been around for a while, and there's a couple different key figures here. The first one is Gloria Ladson-Billings. So she is an absolutely amazing professor who's now emeritus, but really literally wrote the book on culturally responsive pedagogy. So throughout her entire career, she's focused on why students of color, and specifically Black students, don't achieve as well in our school systems. And she talks a lot about culture. She talks a lot about communication. And she talks about how white teachers specifically can do a better job and how we can be responsive in our communities to make sure that this changes. The other book that you see there is a book by Zaretta Hammonds, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And this is something in the Madison School District and a lot of other places in the country, teachers are just losing their minds over, because this is one of their first insights into how they can look at culture to influence their teaching methods so that they can reach more people, more children in the school. So there's a few different ways of thinking about this culturally responsive pedagogy. And you may have heard a lot of these different terms coming up. The first one is multicultural education, and that's probably the longest standing method that we use in the classroom. And so this involves more or less things like putting up figures during Black History Month, making sure we know who Lewis Latimer is. Anyone know Lewis Latimer? What did he invent? Yell it out. Light bulb filament. Probably wrote all the patents for Thomas Edison. And then improved because Thomas Edison had a paper filament and Lewis Latimer got one that lasts that we use to this day. But anyway, looking at inventors, and then really talking about social harmony. How do we all get along, basically, and understand each other? The next one is social justice education. So this brings in the theory of critical consciousness, which is that in order for me to be able to live in harmony with other people, I have to understand not only my own culture, but others. And I can't understand other people's culture if I don't understand my own. And this is particularly true for white people who have lived in the United States, because our culture has become the status quo. So instead of us looking at that as a culture, we just think it's the way things are done. So critical consciousness forces us to go back through our own norms and values and to understand how those are manifesting culturally. And then culturally relevant pedagogy is what we're talking about. So this is really how do students learn independently? How do we get individual students to kind of take the lead in the classroom and really improve their learning capacity? Culturally responsive pedagogy is not social justice education or multicultural education. We usually think we have to start with implicit bias. We don't necessarily have to, but it's very helpful for the teachers to understand where that's coming. And then this is really about building relationships and self-esteem and choosing specific strategies that work for the students that are in the classroom. So, question for you. Oh, here we can go to the top ad. So in elementary or primary grades, research has demonstrated that if we don't talk about differences, students don't recognize them. Is this true or false? In elementary, primary grades, research has demonstrated that if we do not mention differences, students won't recognize them. True or false? Technology. There it goes.
All right, we're good. Anybody still need to answer? Looks like we got everybody who's in the room. Oh, some people are still logging in. Okay, we'll give them another 26 seconds. Anybody still logging in? Okay, let's go to response.
All right, 60-40. So who says it's true? Who would like to share why they think that's true? Go ahead, Carly.
Personally, I have a little sister, and she goes to a school that is kind of diverse, and a lot of her friends, she doesn't think anything different if they have a different skin color than her, if they have a different mentality than her. She just wants to be friends with everyone. She doesn't really think about it as oh, this person is this way and I'm this way. We can't be friends. She just is everybody's my friend.
It's a beautiful thing. Who selected false? Who wants to tell me why they selected false? Up here?
I said false because kids do notice things, and just because they do notice a difference doesn't make it a bad thing. And, especially if you're, for me, I'm mixed race, so I noticed differences pretty early, and I asked my parents. So kids do ask these questions. They're not doing it out of malice. They're just curious.
Yeah, curious kids. So the answer to this is false. Children recognize differences probably earlier than we can even measure. One of the reasons for that is even when an infant is developing, their basing a lot of their learning on mimicking. So they're watching, they're listening to what the adults around them or the older people around them are doing. And so they're processing this information from a very young age. Now, the other thing that can be learned at a very young age, even in kindergarten or before, is racism. If the adults around them feel uncomfortable, make comments early on, little kids can actually, and it doesn't even have to be a comment, it can be just a behavior or a feeling of stress or heightened awareness that can translate to a child. So it's really important that we start having these conversations very early. And what I hear a lot from teachers, we do have racist comments happening even in kindergarten. And so teachers are usually talking about, well, they don't really know what it means, they're just being curious, but these comments are still being used in a way that indicates there's a power dynamic. So very important that we address it. And I think is the second question we can just go to next.
Okay, is it right here?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I couldn't see that. Yeah, culturally responsive teaching is needed primarily in schools with a diverse student body. Is that true or false? Five seconds.
Everybody get your answer right quick. 2 seconds.
They did it. Look at that. You guys are awesome. Brilliant. All right, so, except it's the other way, 60% false. So culturally responsive teaching is needed primarily in schools with a diverse student body. Who says that's true? Raise your hand or I'll pick someone. Okay, let's go. Glasses, blue coat. Whether you said true or false, you can tell us why.
Glasses, blue coat. That's my buddy. He has the in the mouth.
Yeah. I selected Alexi. Yeah, I selected false.
And why did you say false?
Because you're going to want to expose kids to different types of cultures if they're not going to be exposed to it naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thanks. Who said true?
I think you should just start picking people.
I didn't tell you which one was right yet, so. Did you say true? Did you say true? Did you say true? Yeah. True, he said true. I just wanted to see Professor D run.
All right. Well, since I just paid attention this moment. Hello, my name is Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
Yep. And here I am. Okay. What am I supposed to say?
Why do you say that's true?
Oh, why I said it's true? Well, I think it's very important that we have culturally responsive teaching in the diverse student body because, it's important to have this teaching out everywhere.
Right.
So.
Important to have the teaching everywhere. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
That was on the fly, so that was fantastic on the fly. So, this is a complicated one. So the answer is false. Culturally responsive teaching is needed everywhere. Now, we think primarily in diverse student bodies because we want to make sure that the students of color can engage in the classroom and can achieve. But even in schools that are very white, we want them to be culturally responsive and we want them to be able to learn about cultures that are not their own so that when they get out into more diverse environments, they know how to handle themselves and they don't face as many barriers as other people do, especially when we get in the workplace. So we can go back to the presentation. All right, so this concept of culture is a complicated one. And I talked a lot about race on Tuesday, and I want to just kind of go back and talk about why this is so important. And that'll lead to why it's so important specifically in the schools. So how many people have specific rules when they were growing up about how to fold towels? Raise them high. Like if your mom or dad or guardian told you how to fold the towels. Yeah. So in my house, I folded the towels wrong one way, and I thought like I was going to be kicked out of the house because there was a very specific way to fold the towels so that they fit in the linen closet, right? And if they didn't fold the right way, they wouldn't fit and they'd stick out. And so this was so ingrained in me that when I moved out later and I had my own house and I had my own linen closet, I was still folding towels the same way. Only folding them that way in my linen closet, they didn't fit. So they were too big and they'd make the door fall open. But I did this for like 3 years because that's how you're supposed to fold towels. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, I don't have to do it that way anymore. In fact, that's not even the best way for my situation. So this is culture, right?
This shit is blowing my mind right now. I did not know there was such a thing as this.
Yes, there is such a thing. So this is one of those unspoken rules. So there are certain, cultural norms or rules that we know we're supposed to do. We know we're not supposed to go outside naked, right? That's very clear to people. But there are certain ways of acting and being that no one necessarily tells us. These are things that we just observe. So looking at the definition of culture, we're looking at behaviors, beliefs, and values and symbols that people accept. And these things are accepted usually without you thinking about them. And they're usually learned by passing them on from one generation to another. And so when we get into a place where the cultural values aren't the same as us, and this is very obvious if you travel abroad, you make cultural mistakes because you think it's done the way it's done at home. And it's awkward, and you have to learn the way it's done wherever you go. Now, there's another concept related to this called assimilation. And this is the process where individuals of groups or differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. And this can be voluntary or forced. So there's one idea that we all have a culture. And a lot of times when we talk about culture in the United States, we're talking about an ethnicity. If I don't talk about my white culture. I talk about, someone asks me what's my culture or ethnicity, I'm going to say Norwegian, German, and Irish. And I'm going to tell you about the cookies my grandma made, right? But we don't think about culture just being the way things are, the status quo. And in the United States, things have been very carefully engineered so that the way things are and the status quo really are white culture. And why is this? Well, I'm going to give you just a quick history lesson here. So this is the Wisconsin Constitution this is a proposed draft in 1848. This was the beginning of our state. And I'm going to read you a couple of things out of here. So first of all, how do we describe citizenship in Wisconsin? First of all, it described every male person who was the age of 21 or older, was a citizen and could vote. White citizens of the United States could vote. That makes sense, right? Citizen of the United States. Now the next line is questionable. White people of foreign birth who declare the intention to be citizens. So as long as you were white, and this is a specific language in this Constitution, as long as you were white, even if you weren't a citizen of the United States, if you said you wanted to be, you could vote. You had a voice. So all white men can vote over 21. Now, the next part is very problematic. And this is what it reads. I'm going to read you the direct language. Persons of Indian blood, which then, of course, meant Native American, who shall have once been declared by law of Congress to be citizens of the United States, any subsequent act of Congress to the contrary notwithstanding, civilized persons of Indian descent, not members of any tribe, provided that the legislature may at any time extend by law the right of suffrage to persons not herein enumerated, but no such law shall be enforced until the same shall have been submitted to the vote of the people at a general election and approved by a majority of all the votes cast at such election. Wow, that's a lot of words. So let's break that down. Very simply, white citizens of the United States can vote. That's all it says. There's no other explanation. The same for white people who aren't citizens, who say they want to be. But we have this long paragraph about non-white people, specifically Native Americans, about whether or not they can vote. And in this instance, what it's basically saying that they can, but they only can if they renounce any tribal connection. So they can vote if they denounce their cultural heritage and become part of this white society. This was in our Constitution. So we set from very early on the rules about becoming this white culture and making sure that that white culture was established within our laws in our history. Now, shortly after this, this is a period of time in our country after the Civil War where we went through a period called Reconstruction. And this was a time post-slavery when we were supposed to be, quote unquote, rebuilding the South. And slaves had been freed in the country. People who had been enslaved were freed and were able to start participating in our democracy. During this time, 1870 and 1871, there were over 1,500 Black Americans that were elected to public office. This is more Black Americans that were in public office in 1870 than there are right now. So progress was being made. So one of the arguments that I always hear when we talk about culture, or we talk about the way we do things, is why don't they just do it the right way? Why don't they just do it how we do it? And the answer to this is really looking at how we've engineered our social culture to be in this country. We've created it one way, and we've very deliberately kept other people out. And so this was the picture in 1871, but it didn't last very long, right? So what happened at this time and what allowed this to happen was that the government had actually militarized the South. So there were military groups all throughout the South to make sure that the civil rights laws were enforced. So we had a Civil Rights Act during this time that made sure that people had access. In 1877, we had a very contested election where we weren't really sure. It was a very close vote, and this was Rutherford Hayes, and no one really knew who won. Now, the way Rutherford Hayes was elected was that he conceded to the opposite party that if they let him be president, he would remove the troops from the South. When they took away the regulation from the South, everything went back to how it was, and we saw the emergence of Jim Crow laws in this country. And Jim Crow laws are talking about maintaining this white power structure so that white people who had power during slavery could still maintain those spaces. And slowly but surely, we saw this picture go back to a mostly white picture. Now, there have been other times throughout our history where people have really tried to integrate our culture and make other ways of doing things acceptable. This came up most often during the Civil Rights era. So during the 60s in this country, we had very, very well-known racial fights all over the country. This is where you hear about Martin Luther King Jr. This is where you hear about Malcolm X and marches through the South. And we eventually got our Civil Rights Act, which destroyed this concept in this country that we'd be separate but equal, and decided that we had to have all of our public spaces integrated. Now, what I talked about a little bit last time was that even though the law said that our public spaces had to be integrated, we'd been separate for 400 plus years before that. And we had a very specific power dynamic. We had a very specific expectation of white people in this country of how things were going to be. So just because the federal law says that we have to be integrated doesn't mean that people knew how to do it or even understood why we were doing it. So while we started to see some unity during the Civil Rights era, we also saw a very intentional division. And this is one thing that popped up in the 60s as a counter narrative to why things should be integrated. And this was this model minority idea. So this was saying that Asian students, this is where we started getting that stereotype, Asian students were very, very smart, they were quiet, reserved, they did what they were told, and they got things done. And the reason this came up is because Black people at the time were saying we're not getting equal access. We're not getting the things that by law we should be getting. And therefore, we're not doing very well economically, educationally, and otherwise. And this narrative said, well, these people aren't white and they're getting it, so why can't you get it? And the problem with this is that it caused division among non-white people so that any progress that we were making collectively was destroyed. And over again through our history, every time we make a little bit of strides, we see this dominant narrative come forward that says, no, we really need to maintain the status quo, which is to say we need to maintain white culture. So we've talked about this in different ways over the years. One idea was the melting pot, and this came forth in the 80s. This is the concept of cultural assimilation. So this was the idea that we're all Americans, we're all in the United States, so we should all just kind of blend together. And so if you think about a melting pot, we're all kind of melting into the same flavor, and there's not really any individual identity. And so people pushed back against that. And then we had this idea of the salad bowl. And this is more called cultural pluralism. So in the salad bowl, you got your lettuce, you got your tomatoes, you got your cucumbers, but the lettuce doesn't really ever taste like a cucumber. It kind of sticks to itself. Same with the tomato, right? So we're all mixed together, but we're not influencing each other. We're not necessarily working together. And so it's not really appreciating each other's culture. So thinking about, again, taking this a little bit further, if we think about culture more like a stew. So we have kind of this baseline culture, which is United States American culture. But in a stew, you have this base broth, right? But then you have your meat, you have your potatoes, and everything's a little bit flavored by each other, but they still have their own identity. And if you add something to the stew, it changes the overall flavor, but you still have kind of the same concept. So there's all these different ways of thinking about what our culture should be. And we've gone through these sort of surface levels discussions of them over the years, but we've never really come to this idea that we need to respect every person's culture, every person's heritage, and we need to figure out a dominant culture that everyone can work in and everyone's responsive to. So what Zaretta Hammond says in her book about culturally responsive teaching is that we need to really look at all the different layers of culture. So she talks about surface culture. These are things that are observable patterns. So things like hairstyle, things like clothing, things like cooking are things we can see and are easy to tell that there are differences between one another. It was just a story recently about whether or not dreadlocks should be, employers can say that you can't have dreadlocks to work in a certain place. And was it California that just decided that that was illegal? I'm blanking on the state, but that conversation is happening. Yeah, California. Now the next level down is the unspoken rules. So these are things like the concept of time. What time, if I say that the class starts at 5:30, what does that mean? Does that mean I should be here at 5:15? Does that mean I should be walking through that door at 5:30? Does that mean if I get here at 5:45, it's fine? No one's really gonna worry about it. Clearly this class, the expectation is that 5:30 class starts. So you should be in your seat and ready to go by then. These are also nonverbal forms of communication. So how close do I get when I talk to you? Do we use loud voices? Do we use soft voices? Do we use a different tone? And then there's the deep culture, which is our collective unconscious, that talks about concepts of self and looks at our definitions of kinship. So if I call someone my sister, does that mean that she has the same mom and dad as me? Or is she my sister because we're really close and we have that kind of relationship? How do we define that? And that's different. Now for the unspoken rules, these are the ones that usually throw us off the most, especially in an environment like the classroom. One good example of this, again, going back to the time example. So there's this entire scientific field that's used a lot in business that's called chronemics. And this is the concept of how people view time culturally. And we make all kinds of jokes about time, right? Like, I'm on Brazilian time, which means time may be a little more fluid than if I'm on American time, which means I'm starting right at 5:30, right? And there's a broad range of how people look at this, from one called monochronistic, which is this class starting at 5:30, to polychronistic, which is as long as we're there in that general time frame, it's okay. Now there are more things than just time in this monochronistic and polychronistic idea. People who tend to have more fluid concepts of time in the polychronistic idea tend to be more relationship focused. So the United States, one of our dominant cultural ways of doing things is very transactional. So I don't really care if I like you. If we're doing business together, we have a task list of things to get done. We need to get them done, and we need to get them done well. And if we get them done in plenty of time, then maybe we can talk. So this is based on very short-term, task-oriented relationships. On the other end, polychronistic feelings of time tend to be more relationship focused. So in the business world, what this looks like is if you go to a country and you're negotiating a deal, that country is going to want the people there are going to want to take you out to eat. They're going to want to take you to a show. They're going to want to show you the culture, and they're going to want to get to know you. And then let's say you have 3 days to come to an agreement on this deal. In that culture, it's probably going to be the evening of your last day you're going to get to the negotiating. But you're going to still get the job done because the process has run its course. You've probably talked a little bit while you're doing all this tourism, and you know each other. Now, if you go in our United States style, and from day one you say, all right, let's get down to brass tacks, what are we doing here? You're not going to be very well respected by the other person. Now, if someone comes here and doesn't adhere to our expectation of time, we're also going to take that as a sign of disrespect, right? So even the word respect, which seems like a pretty clear term, is defined depending on what cultural view you're coming from. So if I'm very monochronistic and I think time is a very important value, if you show up at 5:45 after I've already started lecturing, I think you're rude and I think you don't respect this class. On the other hand, if we were in a polychronistic society and I'm coming in at 5:45 and I ridicule you because you should have been here on time, you're not going to respect me, right? You're not going to trust me because you don't understand how we operate. Does that make sense? So we don't usually think about culture. We don't usually think about the status quo in looking in those terms. Now, because of our country's history, we haven't found this racially unified way of looking at these kinds of values. So there are still cultures in our society, in our U.S. society, that value time and relationships differently. White culture tends to be very time-oriented and transactional-oriented. Non-white cultures tend to be the opposite, a little more towards the polychronistic side, but very focused on relationship building and trust first and foremost before we get to the tasks. And of course, these are generalizations. But this is what causes a lot of students' issues in our classrooms in the United States. And this is one of the main reasons I believe is contributes to our academic achievement gap. There's obviously a number of other institutional and structural racist kinds of things that impact that, but this is one of the main factors that are interfering with our children's learning. So last question for the top hat. I want to know how old you were when you first remember being aware of your race. And I'll have some options for you here. So how old were you when you first remember being aware of your race? Were you in preschool? Were you in elementary or middle school? Were you in high school? Did you first start thinking about it when you were here at UW-Madison? Or maybe you've never really thought about it? Being aware of your own race. Two more 10 seconds. All right. Okay, so most people are choosing B, elementary or middle school. The next category is preschool. And then we have a few that answered E, never really thought about it. Who can share that picked B? Elementary or middle school? Yeah, go ahead.
I just remember a specific memory being in kindergarten. My mom was chaperoning a dance with my older sibling, and one of my really good friends, Pedro, was we were just playing tag and stuff, and then we were just comparing like the different. This is a good story. I want to.
Oh, sorry. We were just we're just two kids just playing tag in like kindergarten at a dance and stuff, and then we just like were sitting down and we are just looking at like the differences in the tone of our skin and stuff, and that's just the first memory I have of actually putting it into mentality. But
yeah, thanks for sharing. Go ahead. Make it easy.
For me, it was kindergarten back when I lived here. I had a friend, he was African American, and like preschool I barely remember, if I'm being honest, but I noticed that like his skin was like a different color than mine, and like we talked about it, and I was like, you're different from me, I can tell. And it was like, it was awakening, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anybody have a middle school story they can share?
I know somebody who went middle school.
Middle school, anyone? No judgment. Yeah. Back to, I forgot her name.
Yeah, I forgot her name too.
Okay.
This guy said middle school. His name too.
My name's Arias. For me, it was the 2008 election when Barack Obama was elected, because that was the first time. I guess I had like noticed it earlier, but that was the first time where it was like really in the news a lot, and I thought about it a lot, and my parents were talking about it, and so yeah, that was sort of the moment for me.
Yeah, so it's on primetime news and kind of out there. So you would have been middle school?
I was 10 years old.
Yeah,
I was 10 at
sure.
the time, so like
Close
elementary,
enough.
middle school, yeah, right around there.
Yeah, thanks for that story. Is anyone from the who picked E? I would really love to hear your story. It would be very valuable for people to hear your interpretation. Thank you.
My parents kind of like always brought us up like as we're part of the human race, and like we didn't really like differentiate between races. So like I knew that like I was different from people who aren't white, but like it was never really part of like my identity was my race, I guess. So like I knew it was different, but it was never like a moment when I like realized it, I guess.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Any other?
Do we have another E?
I would really love to hear your story.
I mean, y'all are here,
It's really valuable to hear that honest answer. Yeah. Last semester, a whole bunch of people in the class shared, so you guys suck. Just kidding. Not really. All right. Well, thank you for those who did share. I mean, it just shows that this is something that many people do think about from an early age. There are differences that we notice, and they eventually go beyond just eye color, hair color, skin color, and we begin to notice those power dynamics. So thank you for sharing. We can go back.
Go back 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I have a comment.
To the question?
Yeah. Can you throw those back up on the screen, Sammy? Karen, I'll ask you this question. Seeing as it's your lecture. So this is a question that you've asked before? This is not a new one?
Yes.
Okay. So you knew that the majority answer was going to be B because you've seen this before?
Yes.
And you knew that the minority answers are going to be in these from C to E.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it, but still that's a significant number, C to E, right?
Right.
Even just D and E, that's almost 10% of the people in the room, right? So it's a significant number of people. This is just under 100 people here, right?
Yep.
So 7 or 8 people. So why is it that, okay, I'm doing too much analysis. Why is it that people are more willing to answer if they answered B than if they answered D or E?
Yeah, I'll tell you my thoughts on that. My observation has been if we start the class when I'm telling you how important race is, and also oftentimes if I'm talking about white people playing a certain role in the dynamics of racism in America, people want to say that they knew about it sooner, right? So to say that if you didn't recognize this until later in life, what does that mean about you? Does that mean you were sheltered? Does that mean you're racist? What does that mean? Now, when I ask this question, I don't think it means any of those things. Yeah, I think it's people come from different places. They come from different, city versus rural. They come from different socioeconomic places. And we all come to different realizations about life at different times. And a lot of times, honestly, it's not until people are going to college or they're beginning to think critically about some of these things that we really start to get into what race means and what that means for us personally.
Yeah, no, Max. I answered E, but the reason I didn't want to like answer the question, I guess, publicly was just because I never like the question is like I never thought about it. Like I don't really remember the first time it's just something I grew up with. Like I always identified as white. So I don't really know. It's not really an interesting story, I guess.
Paul, where's Paul?
Tell me about Paul.
Paul said the same thing last class. You guys remember? You guys remember? Yeah, so it was cool. It's cool. Max Paul modeled it for you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's like, but it's important for like that experience. Okay, so I got another question for you. Based on what you said, so what you suggested is that people are over-reporting in the B category. Mm-hmm. The 67%, that may be an inflated number to some degree.
Or it's because this isn't a class just on that subject, so we don't have time to go deeper. So people might say, yeah, I noticed different skin colors, but then the next question is, where did you really begin to notice that was a societal difference?
But so if B is underreported, do you think that means that actually there's more people in the E category and the D category than are reflected on the screen?
I do, and I do these kinds of talks often and all over the place, and it's my experience that white people generally are in the C and up category. Many adults that I work with are, not necessarily, well, lots of college-educated adults, but are in the E category because they've always lived in a white-dominant culture and they're benefiting from white privilege. And that's just how it is, and that's okay. Many people of color that have answered this question will be much earlier because they're experiencing the power dynamic and the race dynamics in the country. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for those who shared. I appreciate it. Go back here. There we go. Oh, that started. Oh, no, it did. That worked. Yep. Okay, we're good. All right. So, why hip hop in schools? So I talked about American culture. I talked about the intersection of American culture and race and racism, and now I'm going to tell you why hip hop in school. So, hip hop, obviously, as you all have just probably discussed quite a bit, was an art form that originated in the United States by Black people who were pretty heavily oppressed on the East Coast. And it grew up from there. So this right here is a picture of what we call the achievement gap. So this is representative of the Madison public school system. And this report was actually done by a group called Simpson Street Free Press. And this, if you haven't read this newspaper, make sure that you Google it, take that action and look this up, because this is a newspaper that's written entirely by middle and high school students. And the leaders of Simpson Street Free Press, many of them have come up through the middle and high school and are now leading kids there. So it's pretty impressive, the work that they do. So if we look at four-year graduation rates, and I do apologize, this is red, green, blue for those of you who may be colorblind, but basically the lowest line, the red line, indicates four-year graduation rate for Black students. And you can see that we're hovering for the most part right around 50%. That means 50% of Black students in the Madison public school system graduate in 4 years. This isn't new. This has been consistent since the 70s, and it's been an issue that's been raised publicly by the Black community in Madison since the 70s. And then the blue line, or the very highest line hovering around 90%, represents white students. The green line represents what they call Hispanic students, Latinx students, and unfortunately in this, when they were pulling the data from the public school system, they were not given Asian, they were not given Native American, they were not given those other categories. The next graph is looking at reading rates. So again, you see the big disparity between white students, which is the very top line, and other students. So this next chart shows, if you look at the pie charts on the top here, we're looking at the race of teachers as compared to the race of students. So in the Madison public school system, most of the teachers are white, 87%, and we're looking at certified staff and non-certified staff. So this is proper teachers and then other like special education assistants and other positions like that, 87% white. And if we look at the student population, you can see that only 42% of the student population in the Madison School District are white. So we see a very big disparity in the picture of who's teaching our kids in the public school system. Now, to take that to another metric here is what happens with discipline. If we look at discipline, and that's this bottom left chart here, overall demographics are shown in this bar here. So the dark blue, second or third from the top, 19% of the overall demographics are Black or African American, 21% Hispanic, Latinx, and 42% white. In the middle, we have multiracial. If we look at students suspended by their race, this is 2015 through 2018, you can see the vast disproportionate number of students who are suspended in Madison public schools. This big bar here are Black or African American students. And we take that a step farther and we look at the number of kids who are children who are physically arrested inside school, because we have cops in schools now. From 2015 to 2018, you can see far and away these big tall peaks here represent arrests of Black students in the Madison Public School District. The one reason, and there are many, but one big reason for why we see these very disproportionate discipline data here has a lot to do with culture. So in the work that I do during the day, and then also the work related to UCAN, we look at how these systems and structures fit together, and I do a lot of work with white teachers to help them kind of understand these kinds of things. One big issue is relationships. How do we communicate with one another? Am I using the right volume of voice? Am I using the right tone of voice? Am I treating you with your expected definition of respect? So if I come in and I speak to you more casually, are you taking that as disrespect? If I have, as a white teacher, implicit bias, where we have mountains of data that show that white people view Black children as being much older than they are, and also tend to be, obviously we call police on Black people more often, who get arrested more often. So this is a trend. Why am I making that assignment thinking that a Black student is older than they are? This is because of the race issues in our country, and that is one direct result of that is disproportionate discipline. Now, it doesn't mean in all these cases that kids weren't doing anything wrong. Sometimes they were. But sometimes a situation that starts as doing something wrong, that would have been the same kind of wrong thing that a white kid does, gets escalated to a different level when a Black student's doing it. So this is a complicated way of me talking about why do we do hip hop in schools to address specifically this issue. And the reason is because we're looking for different ways of cultural expression that can help teachers or that can help students connect to the material and engage in school. And so hip hop has been used quite a bit recently to look at this. Rap is the most popular music genre. This is from 2018. It's on the very top here. Second is pop music, then rock music, R&B, Latin, country, and EDM. So this is the first time in history that that something other than rock or pop has charted at the top of the charts. And this is really important because our students are consuming this, right? They're consuming hip hop culture whether they know it or not. And so how can we make sure that that's an important part, or that's a dominant part in the classroom, so that we can get kids to engage? There are a few different movements out there. One is hip hop edutainment. and another is looking at how do we make progressive educational content using hip hop. So getting into our academic wrap-up program, one of the things that made us start this is that the teacher that approached us, so it was a 6th grade teacher that approached us initially to talk about starting this project. And one of the things that made us want to work with her is first she said she wanted her kids like hip hop, but then she said she didn't just want to use hip hop as a gimmick. She wanted to make sure her students understood the power of using hip hop and using rap as a way to elevate their voices. And by doing that, help them engage in the content. So what we felt was really important is making sure that we have the opportunity to help these students connect with the culture of hip hop, and then they can use rap music or other elements to express themselves and express what they learn. So when they're making that connection, that's when we see improvement. We can use all kinds of different rhyming strategies, mnemonics, teaching tools, but it's just another teaching tool unless we make a very organic connection to what culture is. And that's how we get students engaged who might not otherwise be. I'm going to just show you a quick video that kind of explains what this program is about. And this was a video we used for fundraising, so you can ignore that, or of course you can give us money, we'll take your money. But just to kind of give you an overview here. Our vision for Madison's art scene is one that is diverse, sustainable, and ever-growing.
That's why our mission can be boiled down to 3 words: creativity, community, careers.
Now more than ever, we must focus on creative ways to educate and engage the community to create sustainable, culturally relevant educational and economic opportunities.
Since 2011, the Urban Community Arts Network, or UCAN, has been a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on arts and equity in the Madison community.
We create opportunities for professional development, performance and partnerships for urban artists of all ages, from social justice seminars to marketing workshops to youth service within the Madison Metropolitan School District.
We recognize the value of community partnerships as a way to make our vision a reality.
One project that embodies this idea is our 3-year partnership with Black Hawk Middle School. UCAN recruits and hires local hip-hop artists to serve residencies in a middle school science classroom using hip-hop as a culturally relevant pedagogical framework to help students engage with subject matter.
In addition to giving new career opportunities to artists from the community, this 2-generational approach provides students a rare educational experience.
This partnership includes a collaboration with the Madison Public Library's Media Lab. Students record an original song and music video and give 2 performances, one in their school and one in a neighborhood park. Here's where you come in.
We need your help to expand our community partnerships, free or low-cost workshops open to the public, and professional development opportunities for artists in our community.
UCAN is seeking a fundraising goal of $5,000 for 2017.
Okay. So that gives you a little overview of the program. It's now 6 years at Black Hawk Middle School, and what we do is the teacher teaches the content on climate change in the science classroom, and then we bring a couple of people from our team. One is Shaw that you saw on the screen here, and DJ Payne 1, to go over some hip-hop history so that the students kind of understand where this came from and to understand that it has been used to elevate people's voice in the past. Then we take them. Adult artists come in and work with the kids. The kids are responsible for their academic content, and the artists coach them on how to write the rhymes. And the song that you heard last time, I mean, kids are really writing this. Kids who have never rapped before, kids who have never really fully engaged other than listening to the radio and hip-hop culture are writing this. And then we take them to the library so they can see the technological aspect to record a song, and then we do a performance in Warner Park so that they can get that aspect as well. And it's really fun and amazing. I'm going to just hop around here. We've also adapted this program not to just be done in middle school, which tends to be more academically focused, but to also do this in high schools. And then we do have a summer camp called Media Academy. So Madison School District has an alternative high school called Capitol High. And these are students who haven't been succeeding in the traditional school day system and are in this program mostly for experiential learning so that they can graduate from high school. And so I just want to play you a bit of a record that one of the young ladies made in this program.
DJ Payne 1.
It's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. They just go round and round and round and round again. Y'all out here playing on the battlefield like it's a playground. Gotta get that bag fast, even if it makes you lay down either in a cell or a casket. They gotta have it quick to grab it and blast it. We ain't lasting. Closed casket, how they do us. The system screw us, then call us screw ups. Oh yeah. And if y'all didn't know, they making money off these drugs too. They the ones who brought it here, but locking up our kings for it. I swear, this ain't fair. Man, I swear, they got our young man walking around here with no heart, with no care, cause they ain't have a pops there to show them the ropes. That's why I've been losing all hope. And everything just keeps repeating. Police brutality and all these killings and beating. I swear. It's been happening, just look at our history. We ain't lasting. I swear I'm tired of hearing all this blasting. Less teachers, less doctors, more policemen, more hustle streetmen. Kids out here barely eating. I can't sleep cause my mind been leaking from all these thoughts, so I just spill them out on this piece of paper, hoping one day I'll wake up and we'll be reunited. Already got too many people that hate us for us to be killing each other. It's time for us to wake up and heal each other. I wanna see all my black fists in the air like yeah. Instead of any change, I swear this oppression is a shame. I'm just saying, ain't y'all tired of this? Cause it's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. Everything keeps repeating like a broken record name. It's so sad to see things rarely change. They just go round and round and round and round again.
So this was a 16-year-old. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So what it looks like with older kids and sometimes even 8th graders is we're able to really allow them to speak into the real, very real issues that they're dealing with that bother them. And this is above and beyond any academic content, but it tends to be very therapeutic. And these are issues that the artists of color that we have come in the room oftentimes can relate to the things that the students are bringing up. And they talk about some very deep issues. So they've gone everything, this young lady talking about drugs and police violence to talking about body image, gun violence on a national level. One song that I won't play because it can be a little triggering, but these 3 students wrote a song about sexual assault where one person in the song was the person who committed the sexual assault. One is the victim, and then the other voice is a child that was born as a result of that. So these are high schoolers that are thinking through these very deep and, building off of some of the traumas that they have. And they're able to work through that using this setting, which then can allow them to focus in different ways on their academic content. So this is really looking at ways to engage all students using this culturally responsive pedagogy. And then we do like to make sure that we bring in, recording in the studio, making beats, other technological aspects that come with songwriting as a way for them to see that they can use their interest in the music industry to go a variety of different directions. So someone's got to do the marketing for an artist. Someone's got to do the PR, the writing. Someone's got to keep the books. Someone's got to do the merch, right? There are a lot of different careers that surround just wanting to be a rapper that kids can learn from. The other project that was referenced in the video is called Media Academy. And this is something that we've run the last 3 summers as an 8-week program. And it's very similar to the academic wrap-up, but it goes through specifically options are beat making, videography, social media marketing, and lyricism and rapping. And so the kids at the end of that 8-week will come up with a project that they completely work on themselves. They do all the videography, they do the editing, they do the writing, and they come up with a complete project at the end of the day. Let's see. And so in 2017, this was our first 8-week run. And you can see Miss Kaya here. This group not only wrote several songs, but one thing that they did, and I'm sorry, we also have a big component of social justice activism here. And the kids collectively decided that they wanted to focus on homelessness. And instead of just writing a song about it, they made a whole 30-minute documentary where they went out and they interviewed. It was at the Central Library, which is Mifflin Street by State Street, which you know has a very high population of people who are experiencing homelessness. So with an adult mentor, these kids went out and they interviewed people who are on the streets, they interviewed people who are social service providers, and they put this all together in a documentary to raise awareness about homelessness. And that was all in 8 weeks. The second year was looking at the Notebook of Eli. So this was one rapper who was working on an EP. And everyone in the room, from beat makers to artists, helped him to put together his EP so he could put that out. I think that is basically it. I want to just sum up just give you a quote from one of the students, James, who says, "We've been taught how to identify a problem, learned about its impact on the community, and how to create a plan of action. I've been able to meet new people who have improved my hip-hop artistry while also learning new skills like beat production and engineering to further develop my passion." So that's a 17-year-old at the time. And then the last piece of this is our two-generational approach. So I told you about our level up professional development portion of what UCAN does. And for us, it's beyond just what the kids are learning. This is giving an adult rappers a chance to do something outside of just performing our recording records, right? So they can use their skills to give back to the community. They serve as the mentors and coaches. And then what this allows us to do is to begin to create a pipeline that's a social network so that kids that are in middle school and high school can connect with an adult of color who's in a role of authority, who's in a teaching role that they don't get to see very often. So now kids can aspire to be like the mentors that they see. This gives a chance for the mentors to stay connected with the youth, and it gives us a chance to work the students into other leadership roles so that the students who were juniors and seniors in previous years are now becoming mentors that go back into the schools to teach the kids that are there. So it's really important in the sense of community and culture that we make sure that we're bridging the gaps between the younger and the older generations so that we can hopefully start to overcome some of these very big cultural, societal, and systemic issues of race that we have. Any questions based on the programming? Yes.
In this image that you're showing right on the screen, who are I'm assuming these are all adult hip hoppers that have done some of this mentoring.
They are.
And I'm noticing a gender imbalance.
There is a huge gender imbalance. There's a huge gender imbalance. So you see one woman here, Miss Traviance. In Madison, we have she did, yeah.
It might have been this one.
It was this one a year or two ago. Yeah, she definitely did. We definitely have a very huge gender imbalance, and it's not unlike what we see on the national scene. In the early days of hip-hop, we had a lot of very strong female MCs that were in the picture, and that's a whole other class to get into why that broke down. But even on the pop culture scene, we don't see many women represented. If we do see women, the songs that usually rise to fame are heavily rooted in sexual expression, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there's not really room for other things. And that kind of culture has manifested in the local scene as well. So we do like to work to, we look for other female MCs who can, and we do have a couple other ones that have come on and off over the years. So if anyone knows anyone that want to get connected, always really appreciate, having other women to mentor, and also just to surround sometimes when women are in this field, there's awful lot of sexual harassment and even some, sexual assault that happens when they're out at night. And so being able to kind of form a ring of safety around them so that they're able to come up and express their art just like any other man would. All right, thank you so much for listening. As you walk out, I'm going to play one of our Media Academy songs, but yeah, thank you. And if you have any questions or want to connect to us, please see me or email me.